Welcome to the RSP Cast. I'm Matt Waldman with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and joining me is Mark Schofield. And Mark Schofield, happy birthday, my man.
Thank you, sir. It's an incredible birthday gift to be able to spend some time with you, my good friend. As I was telling you before the show, look, the kids are back at school today. They have been off since December 20th was their last day of school. So it was like 12 days.
So it's a birthday gift just in itself.
It's a birthday gift in and of itself. I used to tease people, perhaps most notably my mom and dad, because having a birthday of January 2nd is usually like one of the worst and most depressing days of the year, right? Because you go back to school, you go back to work after the holidays. It's like, happy birthday, you go back to life and reality, you know? But now that I'm a father who has two kids that, like I said, have been home for 12 straight days, January 2nd is one of the happiest days of the year, my friend. I mean, we're two toddlers basically on the verge of killing each other basically since I'd say December 26th when the glow of the Christmas gifts faded away. Yeah, today's now a happy day.
Yeah, I'm sure it used to be like you were like your birthday was like the come down day where everybody's like hungover still and just not really. Yeah,
and that's the other thing. Like my 21st birthday, I believe it was the night that Peyton Manning lost to somebody at a bowl game. Like I remember, like first of all, I was old amongst my high school classmates, and then of course you're home over winter break, so I'm with my high school classmates. I'm the first one to turn 21, so like we go to a Mexican restaurant and I'm the only one that can legally buy alcohol, so it's like I'm having a Corona while everybody's just eating chips and salsa in their taco bowls. And even when you get older, it's like, who wants to go out on the 2nd?
Yeah,
like even if January 2nd is on like a Friday night, nobody's going out to celebrate on January 2nd. It's like, no, this is now the start of my sober January, right? My dry January. Right. So no. So yeah.
Wow. See, you are like the manifestation of like the astrological sign of Capricorn.
I am. I literally am.
You were born an old man and now you're getting younger as you go. You're going to be a young, crazy person by the time you,
or my liver gives out either way.
Yeah. Either way. Right. So let's start off a little bit with the Cleveland Browns in the sense that they have a coaching search and a GM search. And one of the big names that have come up is someone that you're very well familiar with, covering the Patriots and being a fan. And that's Josh McDaniels. And, I want to know what is appealing or maybe not so appealing about Josh McDaniels. Either way, I can tell you my impression of him is being on a show with Brandon Thorne when he was working with the Broncos' former GM and the Broncos' former GM giving the fabled story of Josh McDaniels calling up the Broncos basically on their first like conference call meeting with Jay Cutler and Jay Cutler's agent. Jay Cutler comes off a Pro Bowl in his second season. The Broncos recognize that he still has work to do as a quarterback. Like they know that he's not a finished product. And Josh McDaniels they call up, and McDaniels with the GM there with Cutler and the agent there proceeds to like be like WWF's version of Vince Lombardi with like X-rated, kind of behavior, maybe not R-rated, let's put it that way, and just reads Cutler the riot act and talks about how bad he is, how much work he has to do, but does it in a way that seems like the worst possible way to do it. And Cutler turns to his agent after that phone call and says, "Get me out of here." And many look at that as probably the point where Cutler's career went from being very promising to being basically the quarterback meme that he became. What about Josh McDaniels is either that way or different now that we look at this, well over a decade, into the future now?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this idea that they'll go with McDaniels, and that, the idea that I've even seen floated around that they might give him control. There's this idea that, Dorsey and McDaniels were not going to be able to coexist. And so they might give Josh McDaniels, sort of the Belichick deal, where it's you run football, you run personnel, it's your show. You know, I think if Josh McDaniels works out as a head coach and potentially as a head coach with personnel power, he's going to have to learn the lessons that caused him and doomed him to failure in Denver. And it starts with that story about how he handled people. You know, there's more to the head coaching gig than just X's and O's. Josh McDaniels, from an X's and O's standpoint, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, given his experience, is among the best in the game. I still believe that. And Patriots fans from time to time quibble with play calling. And you could look at any play caller and have some issues with, oh, why'd you run jet sweep on 4th and 1, asking Mohamed Sanu to be your lead blocker? Like, you can pick around the edges. But from a game plan perspective, from a play design perspective, from doing the things to help his quarterback that you're going to have to do with a young quarterback in Baker Mayfield, and Josh McDaniels is up there with the guys like Shanahan and McVay or whoever you want to put at the top of your offensive play caller list. But it's the off the field stuff. What's interesting is how much has he learned from that experience in Denver? How much has he learned now in his sort of second stint under Belichick with that experience in the back of his mind? If you've watched that Belichick and Saban special on HBO, which I highly recommend, you see those two guys, these two venerable head coaches, talk about all the other stuff that goes into it, into being a head coach and all the other headaches. And, Belichick in particular talked about how, the quality of life when you're a coordinator was immeasurably better than when you're a head coach, because at the end of the day, you go home, it's not your problem, right? If somebody gets into a bar fight in the middle of the night, it's not your problem. It's the head coach's problem. If you've got a personnel decision, it's not your problem. It's the head coach's problem. That changes. And so how well you deal with other human beings is a massive part of being a head coach. Does McDaniels realize that now? And if so, what did he learn from Bill Belichick and how he dealt with it and how he's been dealing with it? What has he learned from handling Tom Brady in this Tom Brady situation that could come to a head within 72 hours? Who knows what shakes out this weekend, which we're going to get to. And so I think if you look at it glass half full, the hope is that he has learned what he knows. He has learned what he doesn't know. He has learned that his abrasive approach back in Denver is not going to work. This isn't college. This isn't high school where his father was an Ohio State legend, back in the Canton area. No, this is the NFL where you have to deal with egos. You have to deal with personalities. You have to sometimes check your ego as a head coach until you become a Belichick. If he's learned that, this could work. If he hasn't, it won't. I think the one thing that might push me in the side of glass half full is this. This might be his last shot. I know the NFL is a league based on nepotism, and it's a who you know, and it's a lot of second chances for guys. Josh McDaniels, for all intents and purposes, has 2 strikes against him. There's the Denver situation, and there's how things shook out last year with Indianapolis, where it wasn't just that he went back on taking the job. He was hiring staff. People altered their lives based on the idea that Josh McDaniels was going to be the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. And so the fact that he's still getting looks right now tells you that, again, this is a league where people get second chances, but this will be his third. And so I think human nature will step in, and he'll have to realize that if I screw this one up, it's probably over for me. And so I think with that in mind, he'll have figured out the lessons of the past and apply them appropriately going forward. But it's a risk, number one. And number two, what evidence is there that he's the guy to turn all the keys over to? I mean, I think the possibility of Nick Caserio, who's also part of the player personnel department in New England, they went to the same college together, of them being kind of a package deal where Caserio becomes, general manager and handles the personnel and just lets McDaniels coach. That might make more sense because it's not like McDaniels figured things out from a personnel standpoint when he was in Denver. And so if he's given sort of head coach title only and he learns and applies the lessons of the past, this could work. But it's a risk, it's a risk.
Yeah. And I think that's a great overview of really what to think about with him. And as looking at the Browns and looking at how Jimmy and Dee Haslam have really come under a lot of scrutiny, especially with last year's Seth Wickersham article in ESPN talking about how they pretty much listen to influential voices that know nothing about football or maybe know a lot less about the organization and are just, they tend to, they don't seem to show a great deal of leadership or confidence or ability to stay the course. That looking at Josh McDaniels as someone who who really lost a lot of cred with that Indianapolis debacle, and then Denver before it. You look at this and say, yeah, this is another chance, but it's the Cleveland Browns, and on the one hand, we can say all we want about the rich past of this organization and the talent that's on the offensive side of the ball, but again, it's a rudderless ship at this point. So whoever's taking over is going to need to be an awfully strong rudder in the face of probably heavy winds, which will be the blowhard, uh, the nature of dealing with, an ownership that's going to be highly reactive. And, when you're trying to lead and you have a highly reactive, um, boss, or set of people above you, you're going to have to be awfully skilled with people, and you're going to have to be someone that's able to really handle an organization. And it seems to me that the from the reputation we see with Bob Kraft's kind of stay out of the way and make key decisions that fall within his lane,
Right.
and does that rather well. And then so to me, it's hard to look at Josh McDaniels and say, this is really a good idea, other than the X's and O's. But again, as a coach, if you're the coach and you're doing the X's and O's and you're doing all of these things, there are very few people who can manage that heavy of a load and do it well and not be a complete crazy person in the aspects of the job that they're not familiar with. It's just too much.
Yep.
You have to be good at delegating. You have to be good at picking people who are skilled at what you want them to do within your philosophy and giving them room to be the best that they can be. And I just don't really understand how he's a great fit for what Cleveland needs. But it's going to be, Cleveland Browns have been, from a standpoint of, if you're not a fan, have been an interesting team to follow since they returned to that city, back in the late 90s. So, yeah, moving on. I mean, let's move on from this and just, maybe talk about a prospect or two, and then we're going to preview these wild card games. Who is someone that you've been watching in the college game that you've been intrigued with?
Yeah, and we'll limit this to, at least from my perspective. You can feel free to go any direction you want, but since most of my work is quarterbacks, I'm going to go away from the quarterback position, and I'm
Okay.
going to talk for a minute about Tyler Johnson. And it's
Ah,
been interesting, sort of watching the life cycle of Tyler Johnson, because out of the many hats that I wear, one of them is covering the Minnesota Golden Gophers, which people may or may not know about me, but I cover them each week during the season. I mostly do preview pieces, previewing their upcoming opponents, but I do watch them. I have studied their film, studied Tyler Johnson, and you know, this time last year there were rumblings that, look, this could be a kid that if he decides to come out, would be somebody that would get some probably day two buzz, but would it stun anybody if he snuck into, say, early day two? No, probably not. And then he decides to go back to school. And yes, he's going to be a big part of this, what could be legendary wide receiver class, depending on who ends up coming out or not. Obviously, there are some decisions that are yet to be made. But at the start of the year, people thought, hands, footwork, all around skill set, body type, body control. He's got traits at the top of the class, even in this great class. And don't take that from me. That was something that Jim Nagy executive director of the Senior Bowl tweeted out back in September and basically said, all total package, like this guy's near the top of the list. Now he's on the outside looking in when it comes to the Senior Bowl. He's got a Shrine invite, but no Senior Bowl invite unless somebody drops out or something. It doesn't look like he's going to be there. We're here in day 3 on him. There were murmurs of sort of character issues, which from what I've read, from what I've been told, there's nothing to that. PJ Fleck isn't exactly a guy in his row the boat culture that, takes on or handles guys with character issues. And so I scratch my head at that. And then you see him week in and week out do what he's done in that Minnesota offense. And yes, he might not be the best prospect at receiver. They've got a guy a couple years behind him that's actually going to be good Bateman. But he's a tremendous talent. And then you see what he did in the bowl game against Auburn, SEC competition, and he was unstoppable. And that catch he had, in the back of the end zone sort of sums up what he is as a prospect. The body control to get a foot down, the body control to spin his back to the football and even get his hands on it, let alone pull it in one-handed. Then you see some of the other routes that he ran, taking the top off of a defense, pushing it vertically, working underneath, the ability to get yardage after the catch. He was a guy that, a season ago, if they saw off coverage, they were just going to throw a hitch route to him and let him cook after the catch. And so I think that maybe he does end up being a day 3 kid, which would stun me, but I don't know if this is the best comparison, and I'm not great with comparisons, particularly at the non-quarterback positions. But I remember how you and I felt about Trey McBride, and how I remember when you wrote so eloquently about McBride in the RSP that if you put him in an Alabama uniform and just sort of didn't know who he was, you just had a nameless template on the back of the jersey, you might think it's Amari Cooper. And that's how good Trey McBride was. I think there's similar stuff to be said about Tyler Johnson. I think if you look at him in a different uniform or him in a different system, and you just sort of like close your eyes for a second and watch a prospect, I know that sounds weird, but I think this kid's legit. And so I'm curious to see how this unfolds for him. I would love to see him get a shot at the Senior Bowl because I think that he showed against Auburn and he showed over the past 2 years what he can do as a prospect, as a receiver. And so I'm all in on this kid.
Nice. Okay. And this is a fun contrast to someone, I had Russ Landy and I do our every other week show doing Scout Talk, and he brought up Tyler Johnson as a guy that he was concerned a bit about. And so the question I want to ask you is this. One of the concerns that Russ mentioned was that he felt that, scouts, he and other scouts have talked about that there's concerns about Johnson's lack of top end speed to really, like you said, take the top off of defense. So I haven't seen the Auburn game yet. What from the Auburn game would give you some evidence, or maybe another game would give you some evidence to say, hey, look, this guy has enough vertical speed to at least be a quality possession receiver in the league, if not more?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you sort of watch this Auburn game, it's a level of competition thing. It's not so much, a particular route or a particular design. It's just that Big Ten athletes, Big Ten receivers get the sort of, this is the slow Big Ten, red flag,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Then you see him go up against a team like Auburn. And yes, they were doing it, some of it off of play action, some off of even second and third level RPO designs where, he's going to have a leverage advantage. But then you see him sort of extend the separation on those routes against SEC top flight talent. Auburn had a pretty good defense this year. Yeah, they gave up, 40 something to Alabama. Most teams would do that. They gave up points to LSU. Most teams would do that. But they had a pretty good defense. And they had pretty good athletes on that side of the ball. And he was extending separation away from them. So that tells me that, look, you're not drafting him to be DK Metcalf, right?
Right.
But you're drafting him to be more in sort of the vein of, I'm trying to think of a really good comparison for him. Maybe a slightly smaller AJ Brown, in the sense that he's a guy that, AJ Brown is, even though he ran 4.49, he's not a burner, but he's a guy that can work underneath. He can work on crossers. He can get you yardage after the catch. He can beat press with his upper body strength. AJ Brown is obviously somebody that's keeping me up at night this week. But I think Tyler Johnson could be sort of a poor man's AJ Brown. and good enough to, stress a defense vertically at times, particularly on, some route concepts here and there, but certainly quick enough to work in the National Football League.
Nice. Well, listen, when you mentioned that he lit up Auburn, that's notable for me because as someone who does study a lot of non quarterbacks, one of the teams that I've pinpointed this year as being a tough draw in terms of wide receivers to win separation with has been Auburn.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in watching this game now.
I mean, 12 for 204 and 2 touchdowns with a lawn of 73 and an average of 17.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it was his best yardage game this season.
Yeah, because I can tell you, I mean, I've watched enough Tyler Johnson that I feel pretty good about what I've seen, and I definitely glad that you mentioned Patrick Bateman, who I think, when you watch those two, Bateman is definitely the faster of the two.
Yeah.
He's definitely the more high end, quick twitch NFL athlete who can burn a defense. But Tyler Johnson, I mean, when you watch him with certain routes, he's a very good route runner. He's skilled after the catch. There's a lot of detail to his game that I definitely appreciate. So that's a good one. I'm torn between two, so I'm going to mention two if you don't mind.
Show.
First guy that just popped off. These are guys I've watched in the past 2 days. Jauan Jennings out of Tennessee is a wide receiver. He's about 6'3". He's listed at 6'3", 208, but he's got to be 220 at this point. And if there's a comparison for him right off the bat, to me, it's Brandon Marshall. When you watch Jauan Jennings, former quarterback, was going to play quarterback, and they moved him because he was so good that, Tennessee was like, listen, we've got Josh Dobbs. I know that NFL fans are going to kind of laugh about that, but we've got Josh Dobbs, who's a good college quarterback, very athletic, very smart, understands the system. Why are we going to bench him all of a sudden for a freshman? Let's get this freshman on the field. We're going to put him at wide receiver. Okay, first of all, this kid can bend even at, that 220. You can see him bend pretty well. He has some release moves in terms of being able to set defenders up and be able to use his feet and his hands. He's especially good at doing so when it's longer routes, not the quick slant or a hitch or a curl, or having to run the fade, but when he's running like post routes or working up the seam a longer distance or a corner route, anything where he's dealing with off man or zone coverage where someone's going to try and get a chuck on him, he's pretty good at being able to manipulate them when they're face down on the quarterback. His hands, I mean, he frames the ball extremely well. To me, I love when a receiver can extend fully and his hands are so close together that you can see the triangle formed in the space between his hands. And you see that very often with him. He's got big hands to envelop the ball, and the college ball being a thicker ball in the middle. When you see him and all you see is glove when he catches the ball, that tells you how big his mitts are. And he can take a shot. I just taped something I'll put up eventually within the next week or two for the RSP boiler rooms, where there's a game against, I believe it's South Carolina, where he runs a seam route, sets up the off-man defender with a terrific, move with his feet that ends with a swim, and then gets inside the defender, works up the seam, catches the ball, just gets into the end line and takes a wicked shot. I mean, like, the shot reminds me of the shot that Terrell Owens took in that Packers 49ers game at the end at the goal line. But this one was at the end line, and he gets basically hit from the side. So he ends up like flying into the wall, into people in the wall, still hangs onto the football. And this is like on a third and long, down by 4, late third quarter, and he brings that thing down, and that shows so much. And one of the things that I love about his game, there's like 2 other things that are even better about his game than just that he's tough at the catch point, and that he can, that he shows some skill with running routes, that I think are both things that are even going to get better with his game. The things that just blow me away, unbelievable after the catch. I mean, this guy runs through wraps. He has a terrific stiff arm in terms of placement and in terms of just the physicality of his game, you have to hit and wrap him as a football player to bring him to the ground. Most receivers, you either just have to wrap or you can just hit. You've got to do both with this guy. You've got to bring everything you have. You better have your feet under you when you hit him and wrap him up to drive him to the ground, because otherwise he's going to spin off you, drag you, lift those knees up and just pummel you and run through you. And he has good vision on top of that. He's definitely a guy that's going to do damage with the ball in his hand. And then the thing that just is on that just really got me excited about him. I'm watching him against BYU, Mark, and first play of the game, he has to work from the slot against an outside linebacker and turn him to the inside on a running play. And to watch him square up, stalk the guy, square up, get the angle that he needs to, deliver an uppercut punch with some force, and then use his shoulders well to kind of lean in to the correct shoulder and area of the chest of the linebacker and turn him away from the ball carrier, and then the linebacker's good enough to try and shed, and he's a big enough guy to try and shed Jennings, and Jennings like not having any of it, redirects, gets his shoulder back in, takes all the air out of the distance between his shoulder and the linebacker's chest, and continues to turn him, basically into a circle. And the whistle's already blown, and the guy's trying to shed him, and he's still like, still kind of a bulldog on top of him. And I've watched him do this multiple times. He's doing crackbacks on defensive ends and getting like traction on these guys. Just really understands how to be body to body against a defender and not just be, let me extend my arms and look back to the running back to see if he's even coming so I don't have to block this guy. He has no regard that way. I mean, like if he gets rolled up on a little bit, fine. He hasn't even turned around to look. Now, you may want a little self-preservation at certain times, but he's not one. He's a guy that definitely can block. He does it all. So I'm really excited about him. He's a player. Just you can tell that this guy has the goods. It's just a matter of whether he has the work ethic and all the things that we see off the field that will help a guy succeed.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Jauan Jennings, man. And then the second guy I watched early this morning, and he might be kind of one of those stories of two players, in one. And that's Rico Dowdle, who's going to the Shrine game.
Okay.
He's like a 6 foot, 215-pound running back out of South Carolina. I watched his freshman tape and I watched his senior tape. Now, when you watch his senior tape, he was starting to have a really good season, and they were really excited about him. Then he had a knee injury, and it kind of derailed his year. But watch him against Alabama, and he had like 12 carries for over 100 yards, or maybe it was 17 for over 100 yards. And, he runs hard. You can see him finish and like take on safeties at the end of a run and just, bull through them. And he has good hands. He's a good receiver. You see the burst in his game. Really understands how to find the cutback on, outside zone, but they used him a lot really as, on outside zone there, as well as, from pistol. And it seems like they've spread out the defense more and more at South Carolina, during the latter part of his career, which is, this past year or two. And he looked good, but he looked a little different to me. Like, and I'll explain how he looked different, because when you watch his freshman tape, I'm like, this is a young guy in the neighborhood of Joe Mixon and Le'Veon Bell.
Ooh.
Like when you see him as a freshman, there's some cut ups of him against Tennessee and Missouri in 2016. And when you watch that tape, he has that patience to be able to get really close to the line and kind of like, kind of set up a juke to one side to force the linebacker to slide a little too wide, and then hit the cutback and get in there and like press that line as deep as possible and then burst through it. He had absolutely displays terrific footwork. There's skill to really like press the line, cut back, and scrape against his tackle so that he avoids the backside pursuit. And then while he's doing that, he can see that safety coming down the chute like 5 yards away and put a spin move on him that would just take your breath away, and then accelerate between two safeties who have like a good 10-yard angle on him. And he like just makes up that ground and beats them into the end zone. I mean, and run after run, and his ability to catch the football. I was just, and this was a young, this is a freshman I'm watching and
Right.
thinking, this kid's really good. And then watching him as a senior, I was like, I still see it, but it's like the run scheme was a little different. They were running a little bit more from him with the quarterback under center, and he was getting more gap looks as well as different types of zone looks. So they had a more diversified rushing offense earlier in his career. And Will Muschamp, the coach of of South Carolina, has talked about during Rico Dowdle's career. He's like, this is a guy that we feel like if he could just, he has it in him to be an even better player than what we've seen. And I think they didn't want to put too much pressure on him, but I honestly think if they were being perfectly honest, it would be, this guy could be a star if he puts his mind to it, like, and puts the work into it. Because when I watched this guy, it really was reminiscent. I mean, I don't think he was as lightning quick as Mixon or Bell, and he's not as big as either of those guys. And he doesn't have like the high end, the top end receiving skills, at least on tape, of those guys. But he's a good receiver. He has really good quickness. But he's in that neighborhood of those guys. So, watching him and how smart he was with a variety of run schemes, and he got stronger as the game went along. I mean, this is a guy who bounced off defensive tackles. He was able to run through linebacker hits and wraps repeatedly. Really good. And I think the difference between his senior year and his freshman year might be the injuries he's had. He had a groin injury. He broke a wrist, I believe, and then he also broke a leg. And so they're not major. He had knee surgery during the spring, but he came back for the fall and was able to play at a high level. So I don't think it was a major knee surgery. And when you look at the broken leg, I mean, certainly some people will talk about that can be an issue, but they're not major ligament issues that he's had. So I'm interested to learn more about his injuries and watch more of his senior tape to see if, if there was more evidence of that dynamic player that I saw earlier in his career. So, those are two guys that are just, I look at them and, I can't wait to watch more. I've probably watched 5 or 6 games of each, but still want to like see a little bit more of them just to just kind of round out my analysis of them.
Oh, fantastic. I'm very excited to watch both those guys now.
Yeah. And Jennings, I think it really has a game, and Dowdle, I think he'll be a third day guy, maybe a UDFA, but he's one of those guys, just like we know with running backs, that if he's able to stay healthy and play at the level that he's capable of, he's going to be one of those surprise late round guys that people are talking about one day. Excellent. So yeah. So let's get into the wild card scene.
Do we have to?
I guess. I mean, preseason playoffs, such a chore. Yeah. Speaking of, let's lead off with the game that I know you've been looking at the most here, which is the Titans-Patriots. What stands out to you about this game that's going to make a difference, or something that you're keeping an eye on that you think is going to be important?
This game scares me as a Patriots fan. It fascinates me as a football fan, but it scares me as a Patriots fan because I think, we often throw out that phrase, the proverbial team nobody wants to play. And it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's easy. It makes for good copy. But I think Tennessee is that team. You look at how Ryan Tannehill has played down the stretch, their ability to get a ground game going with Derrick Henry, who is playing at an extremely high level, who, as you were just talking about, guys that are tough to tackle. Well, he's that kind of player. You look at their effectiveness on play action. You look at A.J. Brown and his emergence as, a true threat at the wide receiver spot. This is a tough offense to handle right now. And yes, the Patriots perhaps are the best defense in football, but I think that, some shine has come off their little luster here because they've struggled in recent weeks. They struggled last week against Ryan Fitzpatrick. So what I'm watching when the Titans have the football is I'm very curious to see how they defend this offense. Do they do what many expect and just put Gilmore on Brown and say, look, that's who you're covering? Do they bring extra guys down into the box as well? Are we going to see a lot of cover one, a lot of cover zero stuff with a crowded box, daring Ryan Tannehill to beat them? Or is this a game, and I kind of lean this way, at least in respect to Brown, is this one of those games where Belichick dips into his older bag of tricks and says, no. Everybody expects Gilmore on Brown. J.C. Jackson, you're covering A.J. Brown. And we're going to give you some safety help over the top. Gilmore, you get their number 2 guy. You're on an island alone with him. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to dare you to throw to somebody that's not A.J. Brown, and that person is going to be covered by Stephon Gilmore. And so I'm leaning in that direction. Now, the caveat to that is this. They've got other guys, particularly at the tight end spot, in Juno Smith, even the fullback and Blasingame, that can cause you some damage. And so I'm curious to see if that's the way they go. When the Patriots have the ball, this is a Titans defense that sort of by the numbers is pretty good. But at the same time, there are things you can do against them. They're a single high, cover 1, cover 3, heavy team, pretty much overwhelmingly cover 1, and cover 3. So a lot of the route concepts that the Patriots have run in the past against those types of teams, Haas, Yankee, Mills, Verts, flood concepts, like it's stuff that they know how to run. The problem is it's one thing to run Haas with a hitch on the outside and the seam on the inside when you've got number 87, Rob Gronkowski, running that seam.
Right.
It's another thing when it's Ben Watson or Matt Lacoste. And so some of the things that have worked for them in the past against these types of defenses might not be there for them. Another thing when they run the ball, the linebackers for the Titans, they're a bit slow to get into their run fit. So I think Michelle will have some cutback opportunities. So I think the Patriots offense will have enough to score. I think this is a 24-20 type of game. I think New England wins it. The fear for me is that 17's got legs, and mobile quarterbacks have really done damage against Bill Belichick. He plays so much man coverage, so much cover one that, you go back a couple of seasons to that AFC Championship game. Blake Bortles, once he saw the backs of defenders, man, he was running. It was like a high school offense, but it works. And Tannehill can certainly do that. And so, this is a game that they shouldn't have to play but they are because of the egg they laid last week. And now they're in for a fight because if they want to get back to a Super Bowl, look, you have to beat a team that nobody wants to play. Then you've got to potentially go at Kansas City, at Baltimore. It's a tough road for them. And we might be come Monday, let alone next week, talking about the end of the era. And so shaky times in New England. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I love the points you brought up here. I want to ask you this. Isn't Tennessee's secondary composed a lot of former Patriots like Logan Ryan and McCourty?
Yeah, you've got Logan Ryan, Butler as well, but he's on IR. But, this is a defense that knows how to stop New England. One of New England's worst games last year was that week 10 right before their bye when Tennessee just blew them out. And that game was never even close. That was one of those games where you're just like, how did this happen? And one of the things they did in that game was that amoeba front, which New England then stole, where you've got 7 or 8 guys in the box all on a 2-point stance. You don't know who's coming or going. And they really sort of disguised their cover 3 stuff, their cover 3, cover 1 stuff really well. And they didn't know what hit them in that game. And so, they'll probably learn the New England Patriots have from that loss. But this is a team in Tennessee that has shown that they can stop New England.
Yeah, and this is a smart secondary that I think is playing a wide receiver core that is still trying to find itself.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest, to me, that's the scariest part with that. And I do think that New England's going to try and have success running the ball. They're going to have to try to, try and run the ball against this team and have a lot of success from there, because I just don't have a lot of confidence in this receiving core against the secondary. On the opposite end of the ball, I agree with you of what you think they're going to tend to do. I can see how they just put a safety over Antonio Brown and get more bodies on him, because I think you need more bodies on him.
Yeah.
Because if you could put Gilmore on him, but I don't think that's necessarily going to lead to a shutdown game, because
No.
Brown is so powerful, and he's such a powerful guy with quick twitch skill that he might not beat Gilmore deep, because Gilmore's skilled at being able to, how to play a guy like that. But underneath, he wins one of those underneath routes and Gilmore tries to tackle him. There's nobody over top close enough within that area. You're going to see a lot of the highlights you've seen all year long with
Right.
Brown just basically running through an open field. And I think that when you can have a safety nearby, the more bodies nearby, the more comforting that's going to be. So I agree. So then that goes with something I saw in you and I. I'm sure we've seen it, is friend of our in our community, Teron Davenport, who does fantastic work covering the Titans for ESPN. Does his breakdowns, and he's talking about some of the play concepts that they might try to do to get Chung matched up against Jonu Smith. And I think that that's probably going to be some wise ways to go, where they can kind of do some concepts that are going to get those guys, give Jonu Smith a matchup advantage. And, Ryan Tannehill's not afraid to go to his third or fourth option in this passing game. He's been pretty good at being able to target guys who aren't named, A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. So I think that this is a situation, and you got a coach who's experienced with the Patriots. You have a quarterback who's experienced playing the Patriots. None of this is, some upstart team. It may look like the Titans are kind of an upstart team with new personnel who's, going to come in and face the playoff tested team. But that narrative is kind of one you can throw aside because of who these new personnel are. So yeah, I think this is going to be a fun game. I'll say it because I know that you've got a different look at it, but I'm kind of looking at it a little differently. I definitely think that the Titans should be favored in this, and I think the Titans are going to win this game, and I think they're going to win it straight out. Mainly because, as good as the defense is, I think that the Titans have the matchup advantages, and I think that they have, on top of that, the Patriots just have too many issues that I just don't think they're going to overcome. I don't think this is the year where they turn it around and prove the doubters wrong in a way where they've done so many years, where people, overreact to what's gone on, and it's just more of an adjustment thing. I think that this is a situation beyond adjustment.
Yeah.
So what about, let's go to an NFC matchup and talk about, friend of the show, Michael Kist. He was looking for a back alley brawl, and I was like, I'll volunteer and be my surrogate NFC team, being the Seahawks. So how about this grudge match we have going on with the Eagles and Seahawks? How do you see this thing unfolding?
I think most people agree this is the toughest game of the week to kind of pick. It's hard to overstate what Carson Wentz has done over the past month or so, because Doug Peterson said it, and I think he's right in a sense. He basically put this team on his back and just said, look, we are going to win, and we are going to get into the playoffs. And they won basically 4 straight playoff games in a sense, because they needed all of those wins just to get into this dance and just get into this position. And I think what's been interesting about Wentz is he playing perhaps his best football personally? I don't think so. I think you could certainly go back to 2017. You could even go back earlier this season when I think he was playing the quarterback position better. But I think he's handled the moment perhaps better than at any time of his NFL career, and perhaps hasn't done it like this since college. And so, to have that home game, to have the sort of the way this team has gelled over the past couple of weeks, it's tough to overstate what that could mean for our team. But at the same time, look, it's hard to bet against Russell Wilson. And I think if Lamar Jackson doesn't have the kind of season he's had, Lamar's probably, Russell, is probably your MVP. Yeah. And he's great against the blitz. He's great against pressure. He's great when he's kept clean. He's just great. And they've gone into Philadelphia and won already this season. And I think what's been interesting to watch and getting ready for this one is the growth of DK Metcalf as a receiver. and 3 cones, route trees, all that stuff. Put it aside. Look, the guy's running 25-yard comeback routes and toasting people doing it.
Yeah.
Like if you're a corner and you're still vertical at 25 yards, you're thinking, all right, we're staying vertical. And that's when the dude hits the brakes like Maverick and Top Gun and you just fly right by.
Yeah.
Like he could burn you that way. And the other thing that's been impressive to watch with Metcalf is the wavelength between him and Russell when they get to scramble drill, which is basically 90% of what Russell Wilson does anyway.
Right.
But they are on the same page, man. And it's been a joy to watch that. And so, this is one of those games where my heart says Philadelphia, but my head is telling me Seattle.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you, and I love that you highlighted the Metcalf Wilson connection because it's really simple sometimes. When you watch a player who's performing well, who's young, and then you learn that pretty much from spring onward, he worked out with his quarterback, and they spent a lot of time together in the offseason getting on the same page. That's kind of like Michael Thomas and Drew Brees. When Michael Thomas, on draft day, like I was on Twitter going, Drew Brees, I'll be calling you in the next hour or so. We got a lot to do. Who's the former quarterback for the Ohio State Buckeyes? Cardale Jones. And when they asked Cardale Jones about Michael Thomas, he was like, listen, when I first started for Ohio State, he basically became my best friend, whether I wanted him to or not. He basically glued himself to me so that we could be on the same page with everything. So if that's what Drew Brees is going to be getting in New Orleans, is a guy who will not leave him alone. And Brees is going to love that based on, why that is. And so, you look at that and I think that Russell Wilson kind of did that, said, listen, DK, let's get you in here. You're going to be a big part of what we do. And develop that rapport, and it's worked out. And so I agree with you. And I certainly Wentz has played extremely well. They've gotten some nice play out of, scat back by Boston Scott, who's performed well, along with Miles Sanders, who's continued to steadily improve throughout the season and play some strong football. And, with that decent offensive line, decent to really good offensive line, I think Philadelphia can play a competitive game here and certainly has a shot to win this, especially when you have a guy like Wentz who can break down defenses with his ability to improvise in itself. He's very skilled at that. I think, though, that when you look at, the two defenses here, I think even though Michael Kendricks is out, is likely out for this game, I still think that there's enough weaponry on the Seahawks defense to pose more problems than what I think the Eagles defense can pose Russell Wilson and company. As long as I think the Seahawks don't get too bogged down with trying to reestablish Marshawn Lynch in this game, and I think they're going to try and do that, but to the point that they don't go crazy with it like they did against the Texans, last year? Or what, not last year, it was I'm trying to remember who they played last year or a couple of years ago, where I watched a game where they tried to establish the run so much that, it became a joke. But they, as long as they don't go that far, then I think that this should be the Seahawks game.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Texans and the Bills here. I mean, this is an intriguing game because you got two young quarterbacks. You certainly have, you have offenses that kind of look very different to me. And then you have elements of strong defensive play with the Bills. The Texans, not so much. Do you expect a high scoring game in this, or do you expect something different?
I don't know if I'd expect a high scoring game in this one, because when you look at the Bills this year, having seen them twice up close and personal, and not a little bit more than that, just getting ready for Bills-Patriots games, this is a Bills defense that has always frustrated Tom Brady and company. They're extremely versatile in the secondary. They're very experienced. They're so good at rotating coverage at the snap to confuse not just Brady, but the receivers and company. Their ability underneath as well, whether it's Micah Hyde or Poyer, their two safeties, getting down into throwing lanes, or the length of Edmonds, their young middle linebacker, They take away intermediate throws, short stuff underneath, and that's sort of an area where, when you look at this Texans offense, that's where they like to go at times. I think there's, you can see a situation play out where they can sort of limit what the Texans want to do offensively. They can stop the run as well. They can get after the passer. And then you sort of flip the script and you look at this Texans defense, which has been extremely vulnerable short and in the middle of the field. I think they're giving up like 80. I think it was Aaron Schatz who tweeted it out. I think it was this morning that they're giving up a league high, like 83% completion rate on short middle throws. So that screams Cole Beasley, like Aaron said, who has, I think, been the biggest boost to Josh Allen's young career than anything else the Bills did this offseason. So there's that component to it. And there's the fact that Josh Allen, that's where he's been successful this year. If you think back to him coming out, the idea of rhythm and time in Josh Allen was an absurdity, but that's what he's become. He's missing on the deep stuff, but he's hitting on some of this stuff underneath. If he ever puts it together, he could really be good.
Yeah.
But I think that his growth to this point sets him up to do well in this game. It might not set him up to do well going forward. And so finally, I don't trust Bill O'Brien in a playoff game. I just still don't. And as much as I love Deshaun Watson, as much as I think he's a tremendous talent at the position, I'm going to go with Buffalo on this one.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think this is definitely the Bills' game to win. This is a strong defense. I think the corners for Buffalo are good enough that they may not completely, they're not going to shut down the wide receiving core of the Texans, but they're going to do enough to challenge them. And I think that will lead to, I don't think you're going to have I think this is going to keep this game, in a range where the Bills can be the offense that it wants to be, which is a good mix of run and pass, and really be kind of that power team that it wants to be on both sides of the ball. So I think the Bills are more likely to dictate this game than the Texans, and the Texans are going to be in more reactionary mode. And so as a result of that, I do think that the Bills have the advantage there.
Yeah.
Let's cap this off with what might be one of the more entertaining could be one of the more entertaining games of the weekend, and that's the Vikings-Saints matchup. Certainly Kirk Cousins, you've written about him as being a baker. I agree that he has. They gave him a really nice kitchen this year to operate out of, and some sous chefs and Dalvin Cook and an offensive line that were terrific. And he's played really well, but he's always been really bad from like weeks 13 to 16. That wasn't the case this year, except for the egg that he laid, late, in the most recent games. Are we going to see the narrative here of Kirk Cousins laying another egg, and not being very good late in the year, or has Adam Thielen come back at just the right time? Is he healthy enough that they have a complete offense together, is that they can kind of put up their early season magic against a Saints offense that seems to be coming into its own and starting to play well again, with Kamara healthy again, and Breeze always being as good as he's been, and the Saints being at home in this one is very helpful. Obviously they play their best at home. Is this a tight game, or this game to me is exciting because it could either be a really tight game, or I could see how the Saints just completely blow the Vikings out of the water. It's like there's like one extreme or the other, but I don't see the Vikings blowing the Saints away. That would be the biggest shock to me.
Yeah, I mean, if we're here Monday morning on the timeline and elsewhere saying, wow, nobody saw this 42-10 Minnesota win coming, like that would be the stunner. Like
Yes.
Out of anything that could happen this weekend, if New England loses, I don't think that would surprise people. The other two games we talked about, we could see them going either way, and perhaps either kind of blowout or close game scenario. I think the one stunner this week would be a Minnesota blowout, which is why it will probably happen, because the more I've been doing this math, the more I realize that all of us, we just know nothing. We know absolutely nothing. I was at Wingstop. I took myself out for a little birthday lunch by myself. I went to Wingstop. They had ESPN on, and I heard a table of looked to be like Montgomery County, like utility workers, like on their lunch break, and they were talking football. And I was like, You could put a microphone in front of any one of these three guys and sounds just as good as anything I've been saying about, football this year. And so,
Right.
look, we don't know what we're talking about. So, but that being said, I I want to believe in Kirk Cousins. Okay, I've joked before that as a card carrying member of the quarterback union, I want to see all the quarterbacks be successful. I want to see 53-man rosters of nothing but quarterbacks on every NFL team. I don't care if you're a D3 kid that's backing up somebody that's got one start to your career, like you have a home in the NFL in my mind. And yes, I'm talking about myself there. That being said, it's hard to buy in Kirk Cousins right now. It's just really hard given the narrative. Narratives exist for a reason. It's not like we're just making up out of whole cloth that he's struggled in big games. He struggled in big games, and quarterback wins. You can say that they're not a stat. You got to show up and lead your team at some point.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I want to say that, look, they're going to go in and grind this one out and make Drew Brees a spectator. I just don't see it. I see New Orleans winning this one, and I kind of see them winning it comfortably.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that it's sad because there's a lot of talent on this Vikings roster.
Yeah.
And this team seems to me like, to me, certainly Washington, when you talk about Washington, and at the time that when Kirk Cousins went to Minnesota, the fact that there was a player that came out in the media and says, when Alex Smith came aboard, and it's like, finally we get a real quarterback. That was a pretty, damning thing to say about your former quarterback. It could have been a
Right.
personality issue. It could have been all sorts of crazy things that had nothing to do, that don't give this any legs. But when you watch the fact that in big games that he hasn't shown up yet, it just feeds into that idea. So you really want to see Kirk Cousins, play at his absolute best in the moments where you need him to. And that's something that we don't have a problem with the Saints. Saints can get a pass rush. They certainly have a nice coverage player in Marshawn Lattimore. And you look at, and then you bring into the fray that, Alvin Kamara playing at the level that he has. And I think that this team is in a situation where it wouldn't surprise me at all if this team's up like 24-3 by the half.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are going to be some interesting games. From just to recap it looks like, where we see the Titans and Patriots is kind of going either way, and it's going to be a tight game, probably with scoring into the low to mid 20s. We see the Seahawks and Eagles game being a close game, though I think we both kind of give the Seahawks a slight edge on that one. And then, the Bills-Texans, I think we both are on the Bills here, and in a situation where maybe they win by at least a touchdown.
Yeah.
And then with the Vikings-Saints, I think we're both on the Vikings, both on the Saints. And while it could be close, we're kind of more leaning towards the idea that this is going to be won handily and by New Orleans
Right.
here.
I think that's fair. I do sort of want to, you mentioned Marshawn Lattimore. If people get a chance, watch Lattimore versus AJ Brown. That was, I think, week 15. That was a fun matchup. I studied that and get ready for this Pats Titans game. And those are two guys that, if they were in the same division, man, it would be fun to watch those two go head to head for a while. But yeah. I think we're on the same page as far as this game goes.
Okay. Well, any closing thoughts, Mark, in terms of, whether it's birthday wisdom from, the years that you've been here in existence on this earth, to anything about football?
I would love to impart some birthday wisdom. And now, having made a number of circles around that star we call the sun, I've come to realize a couple of things. One, look, when you get, doesn't matter how old you are, 43, 23, 11, 13,
50.
Eat what you like, drink what you like, okay? If you like to drink White Claws, drink White Claws. If you don't like them, don't drink them. If you like to eat hot dogs, eat them. If you don't. Like, people have their tastes, and just let it go. Let them enjoy what they want to enjoy. Too often I see on Twitter people being mocked for their individual tastes in movies or drink or food or television shows. Life's too short. Watch, eat, consume what you like. That's number one. And number two, off of that, listen, life is too short. You know, you get one crack at this thing we call life, and it's too short to be miserable. And I've been extremely open and brutally honest about my past as a lawyer. You know, obviously, with a new year and a new decade, in a sense, unless you're one of those people who believes the new decade starts in 2021, in which case you're probably not listening to the show, but I digress. You get one crack at this thing we call life. And at the start of this decade, I was a lawyer, first child on the way. You probably thought I had it all, but I was miserable. My commute each day on the subway, there were days when I just wanted to throw myself in front of the train and not get on the train. You know, things were dark. And had I continued down that path, it was headed to a dark place. It was headed to a real dark place. But I, through help professionally, through a support structure around me, was able to make a change. And now I'm doing what I do. And I love every minute of it. I get to talk to people like Matt every single day. And it's my life is completely new. And I said this in a thread on Twitter that, look, you know, I used to love the holidays, but there would often be a struggle for me. And then that, you know, going back to work after it would be brutal because I would be miserable and I would over self medicate myself during the holidays. You can see what I mean by that. But it's not like that anymore. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for yourself as a human being is to take that first step, whether it's getting professional help, reaching out to somebody, talking to somebody, whatever. You know, you get one shot at this life. Don't waste it. And I will say here what I say all the time is, look, my Twitter DMs at Mark Schofield, they're always open. If you have a concern, problem, something you're struggling with, and you don't want to talk to somebody you know, you don't want to talk to a professional, you'd rather talk to a faceless in a way stranger, shoot me a DM. I can tell you there have been countless people that have done that, that I've never met, that I will never meet, that I've talked through some things before. And I'm happy to do it because, you know, it's nice to think that people want to read what my writing is about quarterbacks or listen to a podcast or something. But if I can literally help somebody through a moment like that, a moment of darkness, that will mean more to me than any sort of recognition for articles or podcasts or videos or whatever. And so I genuinely mean this. If you're listening to the show and you're struggling or you know somebody that is, if nothing else, send them my way because I was given sort of a new lease on life by this career. And it's in large part because of people like Matt giving me a chance and people like you listening to this show, dear listener. And if I could pay that in some way by helping you, I would love to do it because that to me is the best thing I can do to give back to those who have given me this shot at a new life.
That's awesome, Mark, and certainly we're glad that you made the changes that you did and that you're here doing what you're doing today. You know, selfishly, we're glad to get the fringe benefits of that, but also just as someone who knows you, I'm awfully glad personally to see that you're in a happy place and doing what you love to do. And it shows. And I can definitely assure to the audience here that Mark means that. I know a lot of people out there who I think, how would I best put it? Their intentions are good, um, but I don't know if they walk that talk as well as their intentions that they put out there. I know this is true with Mark, so you know, I would rest assured that. And certainly, you know, just adding on that, I'll say this is that you know, when you said repeatedly, you only get one shot in this life. Another way of maybe looking at it too, so that you're not thinking I'm stuck. I got my one shot and I didn't get my shot right. And here I am stuck with this and I have to live with it. Think about the fact that you can reinvent yourself. You know, that's the wonderful thing about life is that you can reinvent yourself a number of times, um, and have a different way of going about your life. And it can be hard. And that's the hardest part is starting over because you're going to have to end some things that you might be attached to. You might have to go through endings that you don't want to, that means that you're going to have to, you know, start from a level that you're going to have to check your ego at the door. And you're going to have to be open to new things and making lots of mistakes and, you know, and deal with that. And you might have to change how your life looks and the comforts around it, to make some of those changes. And some of those things can be scary at first, but, you know, as Mark mentioned, I can certainly assure you as well, from my own experiences, that it's worth it. It's worth it if you really want to do it. And there are a lot of people out there that you can talk to, and Mark certainly is a good one in that respect. That I would certainly, I'm glad that that you offered as the way that you did, and certainly people are understanding. I think people on the whole tend to be understanding, and if they're not positive with you, and it doesn't mean that they're you want to have friends and colleagues who are supportive, but don't mistake someone just being a yes person and inflating your ego and supporting it from someone who is going to give you honest feedback that's going to be helpful. And don't mistake honest feedback that's constructive, try to understand the difference between that and someone who's basically trying to hold you back and keep you down. And I think there are some people who have difficulty with seeing that honestly, where they don't understand that someone's actually just trying to hold them back and keep them down, or that they accuse people of doing that when really what's happening is that they're afraid to actually accept real honest to goodness critical feedback. And so if you're in if things you're in a rut in one way or another, odds are that you may be in one of those situations that you're going to have to kind of first look into yourself, and getting some assistance with that can be very helpful. So listen, we'll all wish Mark a happy birthday once again. And, we definitely appreciate having him on this show. And we're going to get back to probably our quick game format within the next week or two. We appreciate the feedback that you guys have given this year. It's been a wonderful season in terms of the RSP cast. And you can find Mark at Mark Schofield on Twitter. You can find his work. We've seen him at Pro Football Weekly, but Big Blue Review. Obviously, he's doing stuff. Where are you doing stuff at Minnesota? What Minnesota site are you doing work with?
The Minnesota Rivals site. So it's minnesota.rivals.com, part of the Rivals Network.
See, look at that. And then you have the Pat's Pulpit and the SCO Show, and then the weekly stuff with Michael Kist and the Eagles and Bleeding Green. And then you have the RSP, of course, and you're going to see a lot of work from Mark on the RSP, especially with quarterback prospects. And speaking of the RSP, this is another podcast where I'm going to have some people close to me get on me for the fact that I didn't interrupt the show in the middle and say, hey, the RSP is available for pre-sale.
Yeah.
And it is it'll be available for download April 1st. You can get it for $21.95, and that includes a pre-draft that is larger than the old white pages, probably, in terms of the depth of analysis of 150 plus skill position prospects. And then you get a post-draft that comes a week after the NFL draft, as well as a newsletter that comes out monthly from June through December that updates rankings and gives you thoughts on players in terms of what they're doing in camps and preseason and during the year. I can assure you it's by far the best thing I do in this space is the rookie scouting portfolio. New readers are pleasantly shocked every time they get it. I get that feedback pretty much everywhere. And it's a year-long labor that, if you love this show, if you love the work we do at the RSP, I would highly recommend you getting it, because you will love that even more. And it's not even just about, hey, help support us doing that. That's nice. That's helpful. It's very important. But really, you are getting the best of what I do in this space, and at a deal where, again, the same people who are telling me that I need to, advertise this in the middle of the show are still angry with me that I don't charge more. So take advantage of it while you do. And, listen, thanks again. And you guys have a happy, healthy 2020. We look forward to having you listen to this show. You can find it on pretty much every outlet that you subscribe to podcasts. You can catch me at Matt Waldman on Twitter, and MattWaldmanRSP.com is where Mark and I put up a lot of the work that you see on NFL prospects as well as NFL players. You guys have a good week.